Welcome, everyone, to another great episode of the Lowdown on Low Code. I'm your host, Ryan Duguid, and we have something a little different here today. So you'll have to stick with us as we freestyle a bit. So pleased to announce that I have a panel of expert industry analysts and retired industry analysts. I will grant you that, which means they're the best of the best, and now they're enjoying the high life. But they're still very active in the space. And so with me today, I have esteemed gentlemen. We have Rob, we have John, and we have Rick. And so we're covering a background across many different analyst firms and many decades. If we do one of those combined experience here, I'm sure we're stretching this into the century, right? And so what we want to do is talk a little bit about this concept of evaluative research. And so for those of you who are new to this, who didn't pick up on one of our earlier podcasts on the topic, evaluative research are these reports that come out on a periodic basis. You might have heard of them. They're waves, they're MQs, they're tech radars, and they have these incredible visuals that help you understand vendors in a particular software category and how they stack up against one another and against a set of criteria. And so what we want to do today is to tease out what these things are, how people are using them, how vendors are thinking about them and using them, how buyers and users of technology thinking about them and using them, and then some thoughts that we have as a group at Analysis.Tech on how this industry might evolve and how we can take a different approach. And ultimately, I'd love to get your feedback on it. So at the end, we'll be looking for all the input, all the comments, and the things you'd like to see us take care of. So perhaps just to kick this off, Rob, maybe just give us a bit of a background. What is evaluative research? How do analyst firms come up with this? And what sort of format does it take?
Well, I mean, in a perfect world, evaluative research is designed to help buyers make a complex buying decision, right? These are very sophisticated tools, and they break down in many ways around the product functionality and the organizational strategy of the vendor. And these tools are help you match your requirements as an organization to the tools that are available for you out there in the market, and to match you to the best vendor as well as the best tool.
So this is an interesting, Rob, now from the vendor side, right? So one thing that would always happen is we would provide our responses to questionnaires that help the underlying research here. And maybe some years we might not be as happy with where we're placed, and we'll get into a bit of a debate with the analyst firm about that. And one thing we would always be told, and maybe this one, Rick, for you, with your background, and this isn't picking on anyone's, not a bash, but, Gartner would straight up say, but Ryan, the intention behind this is not for people to use this as buying criteria for software. So how does that rationalize? If we've got this asset that essentially says, here's a software category, here's a set of capabilities, here's how people rate on those capabilities, scale of 1 to 5, but by the way, don't use it for a purchasing decision. Rick, how do these concepts marry up? And is it fair to say you would see technology buyers use it for that reason?
First of all, not only did technology buyers use it, we were very explicitly aware that they just look at the graphic. They wouldn't even read the 3 sentences we wrote about each vendor, okay? Because one of the perceived advantages of all of these products is their simplicity to use. If this dot is higher than that one, this number is higher than that one, that means it's better. But one thing I would tell people, and other people at Gartner too would say, if you make a buying decision based strictly on the placement of a dot in an MQ, you deserve what's going to happen.
Right.
So, and I think what happened, by the way, it's a natural process. We started out, and Gartner started out by saying, we're going to do this to match people with the right software. But in their effort, and by the way, good faith effort to be consistent and fair, it became so complex and so process bound that all the edges got sanded off. Okay, so everything looked basically the same with a little bit of difference, and someone looking at those dots or even reading the material couldn't really get into what the real differences were. One thing that used to happen during our process was sometimes near the end of the process, where we'd be disagreeing among ourselves what score someone should get, what placement should be, we would ask, what's going to serve the interests of our customers better? But keep in mind, we said that at the end, not the beginning.
So it's really it's an interesting piece you bring up there, Rick, and that that sanding off of the edges, right? And obviously here at Lowdown on Low Code, we specialize in low code technologies, and it's a super diverse landscape, right? I don't know how many times I've had venture firms, PE firms, vendors ask me, how do you categorize? How do you classify? Is it low code? Is it no code? Is it a pro code accelerator? Is it for partners? Is it for developers looking for productivity gains? Database centric forms? That slicing and dicing of this, the nuances are super important. And then you're talking about sanding off the edges. And John, maybe a question for you. So the father of low code, right? And on the other side, over the years, this sort of each wave kind of, it was low code, is deep low code, is it wide low code, is it DPA or low code, or these merging categories or what have you. And I was on the vendor side. In fact, I remember you and I sitting down having a discussion about this. I think it was with Clay back in the day, where it's like, you just slam these categories together and all of a sudden I sort of suck because I'm at Nintex. I don't do data. I didn't back then anyway, right? Like I do workflow. So now you say, well, like the interpretation is Nintex sucks at data. So how did you think about sort of those rounding of the edges, right? How do you come up with the criteria in a way that's broadly applicable enough, but then doesn't just become this sort of superset of things someone might want?
It was a big challenge before you get to the criteria. So as you're mentioning, Ryan, and people should know that these things took a long time to prepare, and the model that we use to evaluate each of the vendors in the project could have, when I first started doing waves, one of my first waves had 175 criteria. That became impractical. So we began to go more towards 50, 75 or something. But even before you get to those criteria, to your point, what's the category? This is what analyst firms do. They categorize vendors, they categorize products, they categorize customers, customer segments and so forth. And coming up with the category was always informed by conversations we were having with clients. If we stuck Nintex into a broader category, it was because we were talking to clients who did that. And they wanted us to include Nintex in that analysis of the market. And it's you can imagine that some of the vendors were not very happy about their categories, and there were other vendors who were desperate to get in the category because they wanted to be in that chart. Anyway, that every time we did one of these projects, and Rob and I did a bunch of them, every time we did one of these projects, we had to go back and reevaluate, do we have the category right? And Rob and I changed things on the low code and digital process automation work that we did at Forrester. The last 6-8 years we were there. Those categories, the definition of those categories changed quite frequently, but the market was changing. We had to recognize that the vendors were innovating like crazy, and distinctions that once existed maybe 2 years ago actually had melted and didn't exist anymore.
So one of the, I think one of the things that, obviously some vendors popped up in the world with a different view on this to try to solve this. And I'm thinking, the G2s and the like, so sort of the crowdsourced feedback. Rob, what's your take on the pros and cons of that, sort of supplemental to traditional evaluative research, and what sort of, from the analyst firm side, what sort of challenges did you potentially see with some of that more crowdsourced categorization and feedback and scoring of product?
So I think the issue, first off, I think what G2 is doing, and I think the crowdsourced approach is a really interesting input to this, right? I would call it, the Yelp factor. Like what does the broad input from the market say, and that's incredibly valuable. What I don't want to do is say, based on a bunch of input, I think this is the best product in the market. But when you dig down into like what's going on behind the scenes in G2 as an input, G2 as an example, as an input, really interesting additional criteria. Gosh, I wish I had it available to us here at Analysis.Tech. And then the nuance, right? So when you're crowdsourcing things, the nuance starts to come out. So, we worked with this vendor who we thought had a really great integration strategy. It turns out we're coding all of our integrations, every single one, right? That the context of the integration is never right. These are the types of things that come out from the crowd that can be incredibly valuable additional information. And I think on the whole, sort of the as an input, this is a vendor who's done a good job for me. Is interesting and also as interesting. This is a vendor who has fallen short on a few things, and crowdsourcing that information is
Can I add
really
something,
interesting and
Ryan?
valuable.
Yeah, go for it.
So a cautionary note. Well, two things. One is information, and then a cautionary note. So when we did Waves, Rob and I did lots and lots of client increase. So we were hearing lots and lots of stories about products. We were hearing stories about, success and failure, and those conversations very much informed the way we approach the evaluative research. One thing you have to be really cautious about, though, I think, that whenever you see somebody say, "I had a great experience with this product, and we were very successful," you can't take that to the bank by itself, because
Right.
you don't know how the customer organized themselves to achieve that success.
Yeah,
And the same with failure. If there was a failure, there are lots of failures that have nothing
Might
to
not be the
do.
problem.
yeah.
That's right.
Well, look. Let me amplify that, John. I think what you said in the very first thing you said was the nuance there is very important. You read through and you gain wisdom from it. But keep in mind, a lot of these things are not evaluations; they're votes. They're saying, "I like these guys," and by the way, maybe it's because they like the vendor, maybe it's because they have that expertise and they're trying to advance their own career. But I actually did something that there was a time at Gartner where we would send out surveys to people, and the vendors were allowed to give us the names of people in surveys. It had about 30 questions on it. And if a survey came back and all the questions were answered with 5, I threw it out. I said, this is a fanboy. This is not an evaluation. No product is equally good and equally excellent at everything. That's just not reality. So if they're doing this, they're not taking it seriously. And so, just like you said, John, you don't know why they said it. You got to kind of they're like tea leaves. You have to divine what's there. And sometimes there are brilliant insights there, and sometimes there are insights which reinforce what you thought, and sometimes there are insights which destroy what you thought.
Right. But getting back to the concept of G2, crowdsource.
Yeah.
A lot of votes tend to even that out. So I do think it
The standard
represents a
distribution.
valuable input.
But though that is the interesting challenge, right? Because sometimes you go through. Look, the gamified version of this is every time I sign up a new customer or every time I give someone a great resolution to their case, I say, if I send you a $50 Starbucks card, will you give me a good rating? Not that any vendor's ever done that, I promise you. But
Wait, they did it for 50. I had to give them 100. What?
What? And G2 have gone out of their way to try to stomp that behavior out, right? But I for sure. And then also, though, you'll look at some vendors and it's like they've had 10 comments, 5 stars. Now, Rick, but to your point, it's like, okay, 10 sample set's pretty small, right? That it's gets a bit tricky, but it's, I think what's interesting with all of this, Rick, to a point you made before, is that, you sort of say, hey, if you just take this and use that to make your purchasing decision, that's on you. The way I always like to look at that is, like everything in life, your mileage may vary. And so again, John, but to your point, maybe, like, look, just because Company X had a good experience with this, okay, Company X is a Fortune 500 operating in 50 countries around the world with billions of dollars in revenue and has this use case. Are you that? Do you match that criteria? then maybe this will work for you too. If you don't, like their perspective may not be as relevant. So Rick, how, like from the Gartner side of this or any analyst firm, how would you guide someone on that, right? Because at the end of the day, what's happening there is it's hard to come up with your own independent criteria for software purchasing, right? So laziness factor. In fact, the modern version of this is GPT, write me an RFP document for my low-code platform, and I'm going to get a laundry list of questions. How would you guide someone on that journey to say, come up with whatever it happens to be, like, what's a better way to come up with your requirements to then look at all of these kind of forms of research to inform your ultimate decision?
I think there's something which is very easy for me to say. It's almost so simple you wouldn't think there's much value, but I think there's enormous value in it, which is your decision will be as good as the amount of work you put into understanding your needs. If you want to buy something and you want to look at this graphic, be it a wave or an MQ or a tech radar, and you say, I need to buy a database, that one's in the upper right, I'll get it. Okay? One of the things that makes me really excited about evaluative research is the more you know about your needs, the more value you get, rather than the opposite. And that's terrific. That's virtue being rewarded, quite honestly,
Right.
And sometimes I would say to people, and I had this problem, there was one vendor who was very, very popular, and I was not a big fan of them for a long time. And, they say, well, everyone's using this. Everyone's going to do this. And I want to say to them, like, so if your friend jumps off the bridge, are you going to do it too? I mean, who's going to save your job when it fails because you picked the wrong product? Are you going to go to the other guys and say, can I have your job now because I went the wrong way because of you? I mean, that's a bit harsh. And in fact, most people can succeed at most projects with most selections. That is actually true. But the reality is you'll do it faster, you'll do it better, you'll have less maintenance overhead, you'll get better answers across the board if you do the work up front, The old line about measure twice and cut once, you betcha.
Right.
So Ryan,
I used Band-Aid here because I measured twice, cut once, and got it wrong, and I had to do some other stuff.
Didn't mean to go there.
Yes. But so in the back of my mind, I'm thinking of a future episode here around the differentiations between the nuanced differentiations between products, and particularly in low code, the market sort of coalescing and differentiation's harder to figure out. And that is probably something to jump into as part of this. If everyone starts to look the same, how does evaluative research shake out a bit? But I think, Rob, you and I have had quite a lot of discussions. So the world of low code, there's a platform purchasing decision, right?
Mm-hmm.
But then a lot of the times when low code comes into an environment, it starts with a use case.
Yeah.
So then there's a challenge here, right? Like how would you think about, or take something like the wave? If I come in saying, I'd like to buy a low code platform for my company and we're going to have one. Okay, good luck with that. But however, if that's your mindset, I'm going to look through all the things and who's checking all the boxes. But if I'm coming in saying I need to build an employee onboarding app, what's the best fit for that? Like how, from the wave perspective, like what was your intention of how that tool would be used to help more of that? How do I fit this particular need? And that may result in, over time, more than one platform for different use cases and needs.
Certainly. I mean, so, I think what Forrester is very clear about, what Gartner is very clear about, what John and I would beg people to do when they would use our waves, we would always say, please work with the analyst and please dig into the model, right? Because behind the Forrester wave, behind that iconic graphic, there was, to my mind, John, I think the best research that we did at Forrester. It was very deep. We tried extremely hard to make it as objective and as useful as possible. But a lot of that value accrued into that model, right? There was the Excel model that sat behind it. So you want to build an employee onboarding application? What is the important characteristics of a platform that you need in order to build your employee onboarding application? If I think about, digital process automation, I'm obviously going to be building forms. I'm probably going to be building some mobile capabilities. I probably need some conditional logic, some decisioning. Maybe I want to automate some steps through RPA. You know what those requirements are. Those lived in the model. So we would highly encourage people to get into that model and to actually customize it for what they knew their needs would be, and hopefully be able to project out to what your needs will be at some point in future. Sometimes there was a little nuance within some of the given scoring that was not incredibly intuitive in the model or even exposed in the model. And that's why we wanted folks to work directly with us. But that's the answer, Ryan, is the advice that was given to you by Forrester and Gartner. Don't use the graphic to make a buying decision. Don't get into the model, take advantage of the massive amount of research these firms are doing in order to expose the exact right solution for you.
So sounds good. So love to get into, obviously as a group, we've been doing some thinking about where all this could go in the future and how we could approach this differently. But I figure I've peppered you guys with questions for 20 minutes. So yeah, is the vendor in the conversation, maybe give you guys a chance to throw something back at me and get the perspective from the other side.
I want to
I have a question.
One at a time.
I got a question for you. Yeah, I got a question, mister. Because we sat on the other side of it where everybody was so desperate to be a leader, right? So, and we understand that, right? We put out a graphic that had the concept of a leader. But my question for you from a vendor side was, were you really trying to respond to these things? Bless you, sir. Were you trying to respond to these things in order to sell the most software, or in order to get the best fit for a customer and your solution, which may not be the same thing? For example, I'll bring it back to one of your earlier comments. Nintex, back in the day when we were evaluating you, not big on data. I have some pretty significant data management requirements for my application. Do you want to get a high score on data because it's going to push your dot up to the left? Or do you want to say, you know what, if you get involved in our product and data is going to be your primary focus and intricate management of that data is going to be a requirement, but I'm going to still sell my product. What was your motivation? You shouldn't have asked, man.
I know. Well, and this stems from years in different, Microsoft, Nintex, QuickBase, collaborative waves and MQs, search waves and MQs, low code ones, you name it. The interesting thing here is that because the buyers are using this as part of their purchasing criteria, what comes up again and again on the vendor side, forget all the things I might want to achieve in my relationship with an analyst firm, because that's a whole nother session. But the vendor goes out and we respond to an RFP, or we're trying to win a deal, and someone says, but Gartner says, or worse, not something I've ever had to deal with in my life, but you're not even in the MQ, right? Because we only let people in the MQ who have more than X million of ARR. So you're not even in there. And now as a vendor, you're like, God, how can't I, what do I have to do? And so what happens is it's a blocker to a deal, bar none. Like if I was brass tacks on this one, I would say, and at massive scale, let's say, right? In my days doing content management with my role at Microsoft, people would literally turn up and say, well, we're going to use Documentum because they're the leader in the MQ. And I would say, but what is it you're trying to achieve? Right? Because if what you want is the most content with the most effective broad strategy of managing that content and securing that content, tagging and making that content discoverable, I can tell you'll be far more successful with SharePoint than you're going to be with Documentum or OpenText. End of story, right?
By the way, you're talking about using these products, the MQ and the Wave, as a justification, not a guide to selection.
Right.
There's an enormous difference between those.
Right. And so what would happen is, it's not like I can't overcome that objection, okay? But what happens, and again, pick on scale at Microsoft, if that's coming up in 50,000 deals a year, and I have thousands or tens of thousands of salespeople battling that all the time, and sitting here in Redmond at headquarters, I've got to go out and do all my training and readiness and produce marketing collateral to help them. they will ultimately get over the hurdle with most of those deals. And they'll have that conversation. Hey, this is just one thing. Here's how they think about the market. And we'll do some careful positioning around, well, maybe we see it a little differently or what have you. But it slows down the sales cycle and it's a pain in the ass. And so all the work I'm doing in terms of the analyst relations is to try and remove that barrier and smooth the sales cycle, right? Because at the end of the day, I've got a whole other set of things I'm going to do to qualify in or out of a deal, right? Because what I don't, to your question, Rob, ultimately, probably, I don't want someone picking me because I lied in an MQ or a wave. So we do database, honest, we do. Someone picks me and then says, you said you did it and you don't, right? I'll qualify in or out for other reasons based on that. But then I've got this pain in the ass blocker to sale, right? So when I on the vendor side, and hey, advice out there if you're a vendor and you're into this, first of all, analyst relations, it's about the relationship. It's about the fact that, hey, this group here, we're friends now, right? We hang out together. We spend time. We meet up in different parts of the world together, right? It's not, analyst unfriendliness and battle. And so you need to build that relationship. So what I'm always trying to do is over time, I want to better understand your criteria. I want to potentially, where it's relevant, fine tune. And I would always ask you, Rob, right? Like, and we'd always have the same back and forward every year. Like, okay, I know I shouldn't steer my roadmap to move my dot in your chart, but if I was going to invest in something, what would it be, right? Like, what,
data.
And right. And I'm going to have, I'm not going to build something just because it pleases an analyst, but I may adjust things based on that. So I'm always trying to move up and to the right, but equally, I'm always trying to influence the criteria. I won't say to come down and to the left, but I'm trying to adjust the criteria to favor me. And, for anyone out there thinking this is a rush job, this can take you 5 years. This can take you 10 years. If you're intentional about what you're doing and how that marries up to how the market's evolving and how you're influencing, shaping analyst perspective on that, right? So that's sort of that's my side of what I was always trying to do, right? In terms of the vendor side.
Ryan,
one of the things you said. Oh, go ahead, John.
Sorry, if I may, Rick. Question for you, Ryan. How often during a sales cycle did you encounter a customer who really understood the model underlying a wave or an MQ diagram and really given it serious thought in terms of, reflecting their requirements on top of that model and creating something that really informed their decision? How often did you see people do that?
It's very rare. It's not something that never happened. So there would be times when someone would turn up and say, hey, it says here, Nintex, you're not very good at data, right? And now I'll give you the other. And now the group can understand what the life of the analyst is like. So my response, this is when I give you the response in the spreadsheet that says, well, look, here at Nintex, how we like to think about data is that data is something you want to store in another database. In fact, you're probably talking to Rick over there at Gartner, and he's informing you on what your choice of data strategy should be. And here at Nintex, we specialize in the process. And so we don't want to store your data. We want to handle your data in flight to help you make more informed decisions. It's like, and you guys would go, one. Right. So sort of, but unfortunately, you'd have to read my massive, diatribe about how we think differently about this space. So occasionally what you would have happen is a buyer would turn up and say, look, Forrester says you're not that great at data. And I would launch into that backstory with the customer and say, data's not our thing, right? Like, this is how we think about it. Data for most of our customers was in SharePoint lists, or it was in a SQL Server database somewhere, because we specialize in the Microsoft ecosystem, and everybody was perfectly happy. And I don't want to have to build and maintain my own database. I don't want to have to OEM something. I don't want to have to use an open source MySQL and have to provide a whole bunch of UI experience over the top of that. Is to do your own data thing, right? That's not my business. Versus say QuickBase, I'm like, yeah, data's what I do, right? And I have the tools to model it, manage it, and build complex relationships and scale it, and all this kind of thing, right? And so that's typically, but it's rare. Usually what would happen is bigger deals, right? So you tend not to see this in smaller purchasing deals because, frankly, buyers are priced out with the smaller purchasing deals, right? But it's someone who's saying, hey, I'm about to drop like $250,000, $2 million on a low-code platform. Gartner says, right? Okay, well, which makes sense, right? I mean, at that point, you're looking for an insurance policy as a buyer.
Yeah.
Right? As opposed to necessarily, so it's the no one ever got fired for buying IBM story, right? It's like, okay, how do we think about that?
The ironic thing about it is that you say, we do it this way, someone else does it this way. You're both right. It depends on the approach people take. I think low code is a perfect example of this. Is it speed of development? Is it overhead later? Is it flexibility? These are capabilities which are, quite frankly, many times in opposition to each other. So if you say you want them all, you have a good chance of not getting any of them very good. If you know what you want to do, and it's funny when you were talking, Ryan, I was in the field for several decades as a systems engineer, as a sales support person. And I always said, salespeople want to get customers. Systems engineers want to get good customers. They have customers who are going to use it right, create a lot of value,
Gonna be successful.
Happy, be successful. Customers like, where's the check? Sales are like, where's the check? And if I'm a sales rep and where's the check is going to determine where my check is, they're right,
Yep. That makes sense. So obviously, I mean, if we look at this, a lot of work goes on the analyst side. Like these things take you months, if not years, to evolve, right? Very extensive process. Vendor side, big spreadsheets. Comical, right? Because we're all in the world of low code. I think every low code vendor out there is like, can you give us could we build you a low code app so we don't have to deal with the spreadsheet? So analyst firms got their set of, reasons they do this evaluative research and the value they derive from it. Customers derive value from it. Approaches, methodologies, tooling. Vendor landscape, you've got your approaches to how you interact with these things and how you drive marketing and field readiness around them. Buyers, users have this way of looking at it to make evaluative decisions. So, so the big switch in this conversation, is there a better way, Rob? And perhaps maybe you'd like to take the audience through how the group at Analysis.Tech has been thinking about how we might change the landscape here, how we might do something a little bit different to how this has been done in the past.
Talk about burying the lead here. We're 33 minutes in. Yes, Analysis.Tech is...
And fundamentally,
Analysis.Tech is jumping into the world of evaluative research. This is something that this has been, I think, a passion in particular of the four people that are on this call. I mean, John and I, obviously, we did 60 waves and we did many of them together, quite a few of them together, and thought a lot about how could this work differently? How could this work better? Ryan did a fabulous job with that analyst relations type of thing. We had a very good relationship, and I think are well over a decade into talking about how this can be done differently. Rick, you did the most read MQ at Gartner. Is that true, or am I?
Database MQ is the most widely read MQ at Gartner.
And and Rick and I go back. I mean, full disclosure, 20 years. We had Adrian on earlier to talk about these types of conversations. This has been brewing for a very, very long time for all of us. We've been deep into conversation about how this would work differently, and it is our intention to go and launch something that we think is potentially different for the market in terms of evaluative research here at Analysis.Tech. So a few things to kind of point out as we launch into this. One of the things that's near and dear to us is this concept of a leader. We don't really believe that there's anything called a leader in the market, right? That whoever's up in the upper right-hand corner is just meeting that definition that was put together by the analyst. The analyst is trying really, really hard to put together the best definition possible. But the best solution for you is the vendor that satisfies your individual requirements. There really is no leader. There's only the leader for your requirements. Secondly, more relevant vendors, right? There are incredible niche vendors out there who focus on specific areas of functionality. They focus on specific geographic regions. They focus on vertical or horizontal capabilities. And it's way beyond sort of that, 15-ish vendors that would fit into kind of more traditional evaluation. So there should be a much wider net. Secondly, buying support. And this is, I think, where things get really different with our approach. A tool that drives a tailored analysis for your individual requirements by design. Before you ever see a graphic, before you ever see a short list, we will take you through your individual requirements, the environments of your particular organization, your particular situation, so that you know that the short list was designed for you. And we'll turn off the things that are not important to you. Next, up-to-date information. There's a lot of reasons why the concept of the leader exists, and I don't want to get into those. But when a vendor adds a new capability, it should be near real time that's represented in the tool. So not a year or 18 months or whatever the refresh date is. As that comes online, as we are able to validate that a new capability has come online, it is automatically represented in the evaluation, in the evaluative research. And then lastly, everything we talk about here at Analysis.Tech, objective and focused and insightful. We believe we have a unique team for putting together particularly high quality evaluative research. We've talked about, Ryan's perspective from the vendor side, the same with Dave Marcus, the same with Francis Carden. Really broad level of capabilities across the board. John and I, 60 waves between us. Rick, lots of experience with the MQ. Really, really deep and we think meaningful expertise and focus that we bring to the market around low code and digital process automation. So that's what we're bringing to market, folks. And, we're really excited to work with all of you out there, both on the vendor and the buyer side, to help us define this and refine this as we move forward.
So, Rob, obviously, product management hat on now, right? So you've taken us through, I guess the lens on that is what are the problems we're solving for, right? So problem number one, more inclusive set, right? At the end of the day, what are we tracking right now? Probably 120 plus low code vendors, and that's by no means a comprehensive set, right? That's just the ones we know and are most familiar with. Typical waiver MQ might have 10 or 15, right? So we're solving for the breadth, which gets you into, for example, some of those niche use cases, right? When we talked to a company the other day that specializes in public sector in the UK and Europe. And to your point, they're not going to be on the traditional list. Obviously, the sort of currentness of it, I think that was always the big challenge as a vendor is like, okay, so you're going to do a snapshot in time. I'm literally releasing somewhere between daily and bi-weekly updates to my cloud platform. Like in the old days, like at Microsoft, if I put out a version of SharePoint every 3 years, cool. I mean, even then I'd have to worry about how your schedule lines up with my release cycle, because we had periods where you were like, but SharePoint 2010 is coming out here. Well, that's going to be in next year's one. We have to evaluate you on 2007. Come on, right? And so that currency or that recency, I think, is super interesting. And then obviously the problem of what are your specific needs and how do we tackle that? So now I guess the question here is, okay, we've got an audience of folks, vendors, people who are buyers and users of the technology. What input are you looking for in terms of how we craft this, how we shape this from those different constituents, and how can they best get that input to us?
John hasn't spoken in a while. I think he should answer that question.
John, how can people help us and where can they find us? That question.
So there's several things that we'd like help on. One is, I mentioned earlier that, I discovered the hard way. I learned the hard way that 175 criteria was impractical. It was torture for the vendors. It was torture for me. And then it's too much detail and too much complexity to be practicable for the end customers if they choose to actually use the model. So what is the right level of detail for our evaluation criteria is a big question. And that's something that we hope to build into our process. And Rob, you and I would do this anyway with Waves. So we'd love to have help on that. The other thing, the other area that we'd love to get help on is that we are talking about an online tool, an online experience. And so how to best present the models, how to best harvest, what are your requirements? Because that's where we want to start. What is the best experience that will allow folks to really employ the model and the models that we build in the way that we intend them to, is really important feedback for us to have, because we're building a product.
We're building a product. Scary, but true.
So this is not a report. This is a product, and so feedback on the experience, how that works for you, how that works for the individual, how that or doesn't work, where it breaks down, how it fosters or collaboration across the enterprise or not. These are the sorts of questions that we'd love to get feedback on.
Sounds good. Well, look, gents, really appreciate your time today. Hopefully for the audience, valuable insights into how the world of analyst and evaluative research works, the pros and cons of how things stack up today. To your point, John, we're working on a product concept here, and I'd rather avoid the if we build it, they will come approach. And so the more we can learn about how people would like to interact with that, the better. So obviously, if you want to reach out to us, any of us here, you can get hold of us easily. First name and Analysis.Tech. It's a great place to start. Go to Analysis.Tech website. You can fill in the form, contact us. If you're a vendor, if you're a buyer, if you've got opinions or perspectives here, we would love to hear from you. John, your point there about criteria is obviously critical because it's super diverse. I'd actually like to be able to make it 175 or more, but in a way that's manageable and consumable and something a vendor could build to over time rather than do one big sit down with their spreadsheet, right? But we really look forward to hearing from the audience, and it's been a great discussion, and looking forward to seeing where things go from here. Thanks very much.
Thank you.